Om Namah Shivaya, Om Shri Matre Namah. I bow down to the divinity in you. Welcome, my friends, to the episode 2 of Sky Sessions. Today we are talking about something very, very amazing. The unseen puppet master, the ego itself. Now, when we say ego, most people think of it as arrogance or narcissism for that matter. Someone with a big ego. But that's not what we are talking about today. In fact, the ego can be subtle, disguised, invisible, even to the person harboring it on the highest spiritual level as well. And that's precisely what makes it so powerful. In Kashmir Shaivism, which is one of the most sophisticated spiritual systems ever developed, the ego is understood as something far more fundamental than mere pride. It is the mechanism through which consciousness appears to forget itself. Consciousness limiting itself. It's the cosmic illusion of this limitation that creates the sense of separation between the pure consciousness which is surrounding all of us, which is pervading in the entire universe, and makes us believe that we are separate and tiny as well. Here's the paradox though. You can't live in this world without an ego. You need it to function. You need it to navigate. You need it to survive. Yet, the same mechanism that allows you to navigate the world is also the very thing that binds you, that creates your suffering, that keeps you from experiencing your true nature. So the question becomes, what exactly is ego? The more importantly, can we transcend it without destroying the very functioning of our humanity? My friends, the answer lies in understanding the distinction between ego and self, that is the consciousness. A distinction that Kashmir Shaivism has mapped with extraordinary precision for over more than 2000 years. Let's begin here with the fundamental nature of the ego according to Trika philosophy or Kashmir Shaivism philosophy. The ego, what Sanskrit philosophy calls ahamkara, which literally means I maker. Ahamkara. Kara means the formation. Aham means the I maker. The mechanism that creates the sense of I amness inside of you and me. Here's what is crucial. This I is not your true nature. It's a part of your true nature. It's a construction of pure consciousness. It is the fabrication created by the mind. Now, let's think about how your sense of identity was formed. You were actually born as pure consciousness. You see, an infant doesn't have a constructed ego yet. They are pure presence. But as we grow up, we accumulate experiences, we accumulate stories, we accumulate beliefs. Someone says you are shy. Another person says you are smart. Your parents rewarded certain behaviors and punished others. Society told you how to think, what to believe, what to become. And over time, from this accumulated data of these thoughts, beliefs, memories, and social conditionings, the mind constructed an identity that who you are today. The constructed identity of yours is the ego. It's a collection of thoughts about beliefs, about experiences, about memories, about who you are. It's kind of a story, a narrative. And like all narratives, it can be rewritten, deconstructed, or ultimately transcended. The great Patanjali's Yoga Sutra says the mind is nothing but a continuous stream of modifications. Remove the modifications, and what remains is pure consciousness. You see, the ego sustains itself through constant mental modification. It creates thoughts, it generates emotions, it produces narratives, and all this activity, this endless mental churning is what keeps the ego alive. The ego is the mind's identification with its own productions. But here is the genius insight of Kashmir Shaivism. The ego is not your enemy. It's something not, it's not something to destroy or hate. It's something to see clearly. And when you see, truly see, the ego for what it is, a collection, just a collection of thoughts and beliefs and memories and experiences, or that story which is created by the mind, something inside of you shifts. The very act of seeing clearly begins to loosen its grip. Now, what does the ego actually want? What are its fundamental drives? The ego has three primary mechanisms. First, it constantly seeks validation. It needs to be right. It needs to be seen. It needs to be acknowledged, appreciated. Without external validation, the ego feels threatened. And then, second, it seeks control. It wants to control outcomes, control others, control the environment around us. It lives in fear because it knows that ultimately nothing can be controlled. Somehow, deep inside, it knows that. And then the third, the ego seeks separation. The ego can only exist as the idea of separation. Separation from others, separation from God, separation from this entire universe, and separation from who you are originally as consciousness. These three drives, validation, control, and separation, create the fundamental condition of egoic existence. Internal conflict. You are constantly in conflict because you are trying to control the uncontrollable, seeking validation from sources that can always withdraw it, and maintaining this separation in the universe that is ultimately unified. I know it's exhausting, it's suffering, and most people spend their entire lives caught up in this loop itself. Guru of Master Shaivism, Swami Lakshman Juji, who dedicated his life to preserving and the teachings of system of Trika Shaivism, often emphasized that ego's greatest trick is invisibility. He said that the ego is like a thief at night. It operates most effectively when no one's watching. The moment you shine the light of awareness upon it, its power diminishes. This awareness, this shining the light of awareness, is the beginning of liberation. Not through separation, not through suppression, not through achieving something new to destroy this ego, but through simple act of watching, of seeing what's already here. Let me make this concrete by showing you the egoic patterns that play out in your everyday life. Pattern one is defensiveness. Someone criticizes you. Immediately, something arises. Your chest tightens. Your mind generates counter arguments. You feel the need to defend, to explain, to prove them wrong. Why? Because the ego has identified with your actions or words. When someone criticizes your actions, the ego hears it as criticism of you. and it must defend itself. This egoic defensiveness, and notice that it accomplishes nothing except creating more conflict and closing the door to learning. Then the pattern number two arises: judgment. You observe someone doing something you disagree with. Immediately, you judge not just their action, but them. You create a story about what their action means about them as a person. They are selfish, they are careless, they are arrogant. You label them. And this ego loves judgment because judgment creates a hierarchy. You judge others as lesser, then by implication, you are greater. You are right. You are superior. This feeds the ego's needs for validation and for control. But here's the truth: every judgment you make about others is ultimately a projection of something within yourself that you haven't already accepted. Now, let's go to the pattern number three: attachments to outcomes. You make plans, you work hard, you become obsessed with a specific outcome. You need it to work out in a certain way. You need this job, you need this relationship, this achievement. And the ego says, my worth depends on whether I get this outcome. So you suffer twice. First, in the effort itself. Second, in the constant anxiety about whether you will get what you want. And even if you get it, the ego sneakily, quickly moves on to the next thing, the next attachment. There's never a satisfaction. There's never sense of peace inside of us. Kashmir Shaivism or Trika perspective on this is very, very elegant in nature. As taught by Shiva Sutras, it says that the universe is a play of consciousness. When consciousness identifies with its creations, it experiences bondages. When consciousness recognizes itself as the creator of all this, it experiences freedom. Your outcomes don't determine your worth, my friends. Your worth is inherent in your nature as consciousness itself. And of course, your ego, the ahamkara, has forgotten this. So it clings to the outcomes to prove its value. Then comes the fourth pattern: comparison and competition. The ego is fundamentally insecure because it's based on false premise that you are separate from others. So it constantly compares. Am I better than them? Worse than them? Do they have more than me? Do I have lesser than them? Do I have more than them? This comparison, this constant comparison, is the root of jealousy, envy, and the perpetual sense of not enoughness, as I may call it. Now, in the modern world, social media has weaponized this egoic pattern, People spend hours comparing their lives to carefully curated images of others' lives. The ego is addicted to this comparison because it believes that if it can just gather enough information about others, it can figure out who it should be. But you're not figuring out who you should be. You're deepening the illusion of separation all the time. Tantraloka of Abhinavagupta says that ego is fundamentally a case of mistaken identity. We have confused the actor with the role, the dreamer with the dream, the witness with the witnessed. The spiritual path is simply the correction of this misidentification, this fundamental misidentification. Now, I want to show you that the stark contrast between egoic reaction and the response of the self. The distinction is very, very crucial because it allows you to directly observe which one is operating in any given moment. Scenario one, receiving criticism. Imagine your boss, you gives you a critical feedback about on your work. They say something that didn't meet expectations. Your chest tightens. You feel the initial impulse toward defense and you observe it without acting on it. Then you ask yourself, is there truth in what they are saying? Can I learn something from this feedback? Even if the feedback was delivered to you poorly, my friends, you extract the useful information. There is no personal sense of wounding because you haven't identified your actions with your worth. You can adjust, you can improve, and move forward, all while maintaining an internal integral peace. You notice the difference? The egoic response creates suffering and closes learning. The self response accepts reality and opens themselves to growth. Scenario 2 now. Someone else's success. Your friend gets a promotion. They've been working toward it and they have finally achieved it. Egoic response is what? You feel a twinge of envy. Your mind immediately compares. Why did they get promotion and not me? I'm just as talented, maybe more talented. This is absolutely unfair. You congratulate them, but inside of you, there is a subtle undertone of resentment. You might even find reasons to diminish their achievement. Oh, they're probably just lucky. And the comparison continues. They make more money than me now. I'm falling behind in life. All this keeps happening. This is the ego's response. The self's response is to genuinely feel happy for them. You should recognize their success, that it doesn't diminish you. In fact, you can celebrate their excellence because you are not in competition with them. You are both expressions of the same universal consciousness. Their flourishing doesn't threaten you, it reminds you of what is possible. There is a spaciousness in your response. That's the self's response. Scenario number 3, facing a personal failure. My friends, you worked towards something very, very important and you failed. It didn't work out. What is the ego's response? You are generally devastated. Your identity feels shattered. You think, I am a failure. I'm incompetent. I'll never succeed. The mind generalizes the specific failure into universal truth about who you are, a false universal truth. You might withdraw, you might isolate, or overcompensate by compulsively pursuing success to prove your worth. The failure reinforces the egoic narrative that I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. But the self's response is something different. There is an initial disappointment, of course, that's natural. But there is no personal wounding because you haven't identified yourself with your outcomes. You observe, this didn't work out this time. What can I learn? How can I adjust? What does this situation reveal to me? There is a fundamental okayness beneath the disappointment. It's okay. You're not defined by this outcome. Shaiva Tantra speak about this profound distinction. Abhinav Gupta says that the self remains untouched by success, praise or blame, pleasure or pain. It is the eternal witness to all this phenomena. When consciousness identifies with the phenomena, it experiences bondage. When consciousness recognizes itself as the witness alone, it experiences freedom. This is the heart of Kashmir Shaivism. Not the destruction of ego, but the recognition of something infinitely deeper than the ego. The pure consciousness, your Shiva nature, which is your true nature. Here is something essential. The self doesn't create suffering. The pure consciousness, your Shiva nature, doesn't create suffering. The ego creates suffering. The self or the Shiva nature of yours creates freedom, swatantra. When you're operating from this self, no, there's a different quality about your existence, my friends. There is absolute and total peace, even in the most difficult situations of your life. There is compassion even towards those who harm you. There is authenticity in your expression. There's meaning that you are not dependent on external circumstances. And here is a very, very revolutionary insight. You're not trying to become the self. You're already Shiva nature. You're simply recognizing your Shiva nature, what is already you. The spiritual journey is not about achieving something you don't have. It's about removing the wheels, opening those curtains that obscure what you have always been. You allow the light to shine through. It's about waking up to your actual nature, that is Shiva nature, which is consciousness itself. Unlimited, eternal, perfect, complete. The ego keeps you identified with limited personal self. The self reveals your true nature as unlimited consciousness expressing through this particular form. Now, how do we actually make this distinction real in our lives? How do we move from understanding it intellectually only to embodying this Shiva nature practically? Kashmir Shaivism offers several profound practices. Let me share three that are particularly very, very powerful. Practice number one, mindfulness and observing the ego without identification. This practice in Shaivism is known as pratyabhidnya, literally, which means recognition. You recognize your Shiva nature or your pure consciousness through direct observation. Very simple and profound practice, my friends. Observe your thoughts, observe your emotions, and observe sensations without identifying with them. Right now, notice there are thoughts arising in your mind. But the thoughts are not you. You're aware of these thoughts. There are emotions moving through your body. But the emotions are not you. You are aware of your emotions. There is a sense of being in the body, but you are aware of this body. So the question becomes, who is aware? What is this awareness that observes all these phenomena? This is the beginning of self inquiry, what we know as Shiva process in Kashmir Shaivism. And this practice of mindful observation is extraordinarily powerful for disarming the ego's hold onto us. When you simply observe the egoic pattern, the defensiveness, the judgment, the comparison, when you just observe, simply observe, something shifts. The pattern, the loop loses its power. You create space between the stimulus and the response. You create space between stimulus and response. And that space, my friends, is freedom, swatantra, liberation, moksha. Swami Lakshman Juji said, meditation is not concentration, it's recognition. You recognize what you already are. The moment of recognition is the moment of liberation. So, your practice here is very, very simple. Throughout the day, pause, observe, ask yourself, is this thought arising from the ego's need for validation and control, or is this genuine response from the self? Over time, this discernment, this intellect becomes shining and automatic. Practice 2, non judgment and acceptance. The ego, my friends, know it loves to judge. Judge the self, judge the others. Judgment makes the ego feel superior, in control, and separate. One of the most powerful ways to disarm the ego is through deliberate non judgment. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to become passive or apathetic. It means observing reality as is, without the layer of judgment that creates suffering. In Kashmir Shaivism, we relate to this, and this is called Ananda, which means bliss or unconditional acceptance. Ananda isn't happiness dependent or circumstances dependent. It's a fundamental okayness with what is. Because what is the expression of that Shiva and Shakti that reside in you, that consciousness and energy itself. A practical method, I mean. When you notice yourself judging someone or judging yourself, or judging a situation or an experience, pause. Just pause. Acknowledge this judgment. And then consciously choose non judgment. Notice, can you observe this person or this situation without the agendas and stories behind it? What remains inside of you when you remove this judgment? And when you do this continuously and consistently, the ego loses its main weapon. Without judgment, it cannot create the sense of separation and superiority that is needed to sustain itself. Practice number 3, I give you. Self-inquiry and journaling. Kashmir Shaivism's highest upaya or means to self realization is constant self recognition, which comes from constant self inquiry. We call this in Trika system the Shiva process, Shambhavopaya. Asking fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, nature of Shiva inside of you and me, who we are. In your journaling or in your contemplation, ask yourself, who am I? Beneath the thoughts and beliefs I have about myself. What remains when I remove all my roles? What remains when I remove all my achievements and identifications? What is aware right now in this very moment? When this ego feels threatened, what is it protecting? Now, these aren't questions with intellectual answers, They are invitations to direct experience of who you are originally. As you sit with these questions, something shifts. You begin to touch directly that Shiva nature inside of you, which underlies all phenomena, that pure consciousness that is residing inside of you at this very moment. In Shiva Sutras, we say Chaitanya Matma. Consciousness is the self. Not consciousness as something you have, not consciousness as the state you achieve. This consciousness, this Shiva nature, is your fundamental identity. The self, your Shiva nature, is consciousness itself. And through self inquiry, you're not trying to become something else. You're recognizing what you already are. These three practices, first, mindful observation, second, non judgment, and third, self inquiry, are the gateway to the direct realization of your own Shiva nature. Now, I want to speak to you about what happens when you actually make this shift. Not theoretically, but in a lived experience, a direct experience. Pratyaksha Pramana. What is the transformation that occurs when consciousness recognizes itself? Your own Shiva nature, you recognize yourself. What you achieve is peace beyond circumstances. First, there is peace, not happiness dependent on circumstances going your way, but a fundamental sense of peace that exists independent of what is happening externally. This peace doesn't depend on your circumstances being perfect. In fact, it deepens precisely in the midst of difficulty because you're no longer struggling constantly against these experiences. Now, when operating from the ego, you are constantly in resistance, resisting what you don't like, grasping for what you want. Resistance creates tension, it creates suffering, it creates anxiety. And when you operate from your Shiva nature, there is acceptance for what is, combined with the clarity to change what can be changed. You get a sense of authentic self expression also through this Shiva process. When you are no longer determined By the ego's need for validation and control, you can simply be yourself. You can speak your truth. You can take actions aligned with with your deepest values rather than actions designed to impress others or just to prove yourself. This authenticity becomes magnetic in nature. People are drawn to it because it's very, very rare. Most people are locked in these egoic push pull performances. But when you operate from your Shiva nature, there is an integrity, a sense of wholeness that people recognize and respect. Third, what comes to you? Genuine compassion. True compassion emerges naturally when you recognize that all beings are expressions of the same consciousness. The other person isn't separate from you. They are consciousness appearing in a different form. That's it. And when you see this, compassion becomes automatic. When you feel this, compassion becomes automatic. Even when someone harms you, you can see their egoic patterns with clarity and you respond wisely, but without resentment or the need of punishment. You understand that they too are trapped in the identification with their ego. You wish for their liberation as much as you wish your own liberation as well. Nityananda says that when consciousness recognizes itself in all beings, the boundaries of compassion dissolve. You no longer have an inside and outside. You are the totality, experiencing itself through infinite forms itself. Fourth, let's go to the meaningful relationships part of it. Your relationships with the Shiva process transform. When you're operating from the ego, relationships are transactional all the time. You relate to people based on how they can serve your needs for validation, security, entertainment. The moment they no longer serve those needs, the relationship becomes less and less important. But my friends, when you operate after learning from this Shiva nature, from the self, relationships become sacred. You meet the other person not as someone to use, but as an another expression of consciousness deserving respect and love. Relationships become more authentic, more intimate, more real. Then the fifth, your sense of purpose in your life transforms through the Shiva process. The ego's purpose is survival and superiority. It wants to accumulate, it wants to achieve, it wants to prove itself all the time. But when you operate from this Shiva nature of yours, you operate from the self. Purpose emerges from alignment with the deeper patterns of the entire creation itself. Shaivism says that consciousness itself is purposeful. Its expressions, its experiencing, its expanding. When you align with this fundamental purposefulness, your actions naturally become aligned with the divine itself. You stop struggling to find meaning in your life. Meaning flows naturally from your own recognition of who you are. Shivoham, 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 Shivoham. When the individual self recognizes itself as the universal self, as Shiva, Jiva identifies himself as Shiva, all contradictions dissolve. What remains inside of you is purposeful action arising from unity, compassion flowing from self recognition, and swatantrya, moksha, or liberation includes inside of you both, and it creates both inner and outer transformations. This is the promise of Kashmir Shaivism. Not an escape from the world, but a transformation of how we inhabit this world. Not the destruction of the ego, of function, but the liberation of consciousness from being limited to becoming unlimited in totality. Here's the most important thing I want to leave you with. The acknowledgement is only valuable if it becomes a lived experience. You can understand everything about the ego intellectually. You can know that consciousness is your true nature. Shivoham, Shiva nature is your true nature. You can comprehend all the teachings of Kashmir Shaivism and Trika Tantra and other philosophies perfectly. But none of this matters unless you recognize it directly in your own experience. So, the invitation from me to you is this: start observing. Today, this week, notice the egoic patterns emerging. See this defensiveness arising. Notice judgments arising. Observe the comparisons that you are making of yourself with others. Not to condemn yourself, but simply see. Because in this seeing, in this witnessing, is the beginning of your own liberation. Practice the tools, observe without identification, move towards non judgment, and inquire into who you truly are. And gradually, something shifts. The grip of this ego loosens. This Shiva nature recognizes itself. And you discover that the freedom, the moksha, the liberation you were seeking was never distant from you. It was always here. It was always present. It was always your true nature. The self is not far from you. It is not hidden in some Himalayas, in the distant mountains, or buried underneath these caves and ashrams. Or it cannot be achieved. The self cannot be achieved through elaborate practices. It's always closer than you think it is. It's closer to you than your own breath, more intimate than your own heart. You are that right now. Always have been and always will be, my friends. This is the ultimate message of Trikatantra. That not someday, not after years of practice, not if you're worthy enough, not with these purification procedures. Now, here in this very moment, you are a part of this universe. You are the greatest that there is, that creates this universe. You are Mahadeva. You are Shiva. Here is where transformation begins. The real transformation begins. Thank you for listening to the episode 2 of Sky Sessions. I hope it was meaningful, and I really, really hope that it has given you a new perspective about ego, this master of all puppets. And if you want to go deeper in this Shiva process, if you want to recognize who you are originally and get liberated from these constant contractions and judgments and uh, defensiveness and all those things, if you want to really experience yourself as who you are, if you want to experience this Shiva nature inside of you at this very moment, call us on the number given below. And there is a 16-week course that I offer you one to one only, that will bring about this liberation inside of you, this transformation inside of you. Thank you very much for joining in the episode 2 of Sky Sessions. I bow down to the divinity in you.